There is a moment you will not remember precisely. It didn't arrive with a dramatic soundtrack. No single event announced it. No morning you woke up and thought, "This is the day everything shifts." It was probably a Tuesday or a Sunday evening. You were in the middle of something ordinary, a drive home, a shower, a quiet meal alone, and something inside you, without asking your permission, made a different kind of decision. Not louder than the ones before, quieter actually, but entirely different in its nature. You didn't call it transformation. You called it exhaustion. You called it clarity. You called it enough. But what happened in that moment is what Jung spent decades mapping. The self completed its first real movement of individuation. And the ego, faithful to its oldest instinct, didn't notice. That is what no one has told you until now. You are not in the process of becoming someone new. You already became. The reason it doesn't yet feel like a settled fact is this. The ego is always the last to receive news of its own evolution. Jung called the deeper intelligence of the psyche the self, not as a philosophical abstraction, but as the part of you that kept standing when everything else collapsed. The part that doesn't need your conscious approval to move forward. The part that does not wait until you feel ready. The self doesn't ask permission. It executes. And when it completes a full cycle of transformation, it leaves a mark. Not in your thoughts, in your body, in the texture of your days, in the specific, undeniable weight of certain spaces, certain conversations, certain versions of yourself you used to inhabit with ease. That mark is you, right now. The discomfort you feel in rooms that once fit perfectly, the conversations that no longer carry the gravity they once had. That strange stillness when someone describes you as the person you were a year ago, and something inside you wants to say, that's no longer accurate. That is not confusion. That is not loss of direction. That is your new identity sending signals from within, knocking on the door of a consciousness that hasn't yet decided to open it. The question is not when you are going to change. The question is, when are you going to recognize the change that already happened? There are 5 signs Jung identified as markers of crossing the threshold. Not signals of what is coming, signals of what has already arrived. If you are watching this at this exact moment, you will recognize each one, not as something you are waiting for, as something you already live. The first sign is the one that confuses the most, because it disguises itself as loss. You can no longer force enthusiasm for what used to motivate you with ease. The goals you once chased with urgency now seem correct on paper, but hollow in your body. The project that used to ignite you complete it now with discipline but without fire. And instead of reading this as a sign of progress, you read it as evidence that something is broken in you. Nothing is broken. Jung documented this phenomenon with a precise image. When a tree grows beyond what its soil can sustain, the roots seek new earth before the tree knows it. The tree doesn't feel the movement. It only feels that something in it no longer fits where it stands. That is what you feel when old goals no longer move you. You didn't lose the capacity to desire. Yourself is already rooting in a larger territory, and your conscious desires haven't yet received the coordinates of the new destination. The fire didn't die, it changed fuel. The second sign is quieter, but equally precise. Certain people in your life have begun to feel distant, not because of conflict, not because they stopped mattering, but because the frequency on which you communicate is no longer the same. Conversations that used to run for hours now feel complete in 20 minutes. And you have felt guilty about that. As if the distance were a betrayal of something real. It is not betrayal, it is geometry. When you change in a real way, your field of resonance changes with you. The people who resonated with who you were remain the same people. They are not lesser or greater. They are simply no longer the exact mirror of who you are now. The ego reads that distance as loss. The self registers it for what it is, natural reorganization, aligning with the new internal configuration. Those who belong to your new version are arriving, or have already arrived. You just haven't recognized them yet. The third sign is the most uncomfortable to admit, because it demands a kind of accountability the ego prefers to avoid. You began saying no differently, not the old no, the one that arrived forced and guilt-laden, after long internal negotiations. This new no arrives earlier. It arrives without drama. It comes from a place in you that simply knows something doesn't belong to where you're going, even if it cannot give you a rational explanation. Jung had a name for this, the transcendent function of the self, not a mystical ability, the deep intelligence of your psyche operating with information your conscious mind doesn't yet have access to. When that function activates after a cycle of individuation, your internal system begins filtering and redirecting, not from fear, but from alignment, not from resistance, but from recognition of what no longer corresponds to who you are. That new no you feel is your new self making decisions. It has been doing so for weeks. Do you recognize it? That moment when you were about to say yes, out of habit, out of not wanting to disappoint, out of maintaining the image of who you were, and something in you stopped before the words came out. That something has a name. It is your new identity operating from the core. The fourth sign is the one that hurts most to acknowledge, and the one that most clearly confirms the crossing already happened. You began to feel a new discomfort in your own body when you act from who you were. Not always, not in every moment, but there are specific situations when you put on the old mask, the old tone, the posture the world expects, and something in you tightens. A subtle pressure in the chest, a stiffness in the shoulders, a fatigue that arrives too soon for how little you actually did. Jung called that mask the persona, not as an insult, but as a precise description. The interface the ego constructs to operate in the social world. The set of behaviors and responses we learned were acceptable, safe, predictable. The persona wasn't false in its origin. It was necessary, the only navigation tool available for the terrain you were crossing. But when the self advances and the persona doesn't advance with it, friction is created. And that friction has a physical name: exhaustion without visible cause. The sensation of performing in a play you no longer believe in. That moment at the end of the day when you wonder why you're so tired, not knowing that carrying an identity that is no longer yours consumes more energy than any physical labor. Your body always knew. It's been telling you. The fifth sign is the most silent and the most profound, and the one most people overlook, because it doesn't resemble anything we've been taught to call transformation. You began to tolerate uncertainty better, not because you found the answers, but because something in you found a foundation that doesn't depend on answers to hold itself upright. Before, not knowing what was coming produced an anxiety that invaded everything. Now, not always, but with growing frequency, there are moments when you don't know what comes next, and something in you responds with a quiet that has no rational explanation. That quiet is not indifference. It is the self's confidence in its own process. Jung documented this state as one of the most reliable markers of real progress in individuation, the capacity to hold the tension of opposites without needing to resolve it immediately. To move forward without the complete map, because something deeper than the map already knows the territory. That moment when you catch yourself calmer than you should be, given what's happening, that is not resignation. That is your self operating from its new level with a certainty you haven't yet learned to name, but that your body has already registered as real. Do you know how long you've been this way? Longer than you think. Now comes the part the ego doesn't want to hear. If you have already crossed the threshold, and the 5 signs you just recognized confirm that you have, the problem is not that the transformation didn't happen. The problem is that you are still making decisions from who you were, still consulting the old self as if it retained authority over the territory your new identity already inhabits. And that has a cost. In energy, in time, in opportunities that go unrecognized because the old ego doesn't have the eyes to see them. Jung offered an image for this. A man who has spent months dreaming of a new house, describing its rooms in detail that only someone who had already been there could know. Yet every morning he returns to the old apartment, because it is the only place his ego recognizes as real. Your mind is already in the new house. It has been there for weeks. But your feet are still sleeping in the old apartment, out of inertia, out of habit, out of the quiet fear that if you abandon the known and the new proves less real than what you dreamed, there will be no way back. Here is what no outside voice can rewrite. What has already happened in the depths of your psyche cannot be undone, not because it is static, but because the self that completed that cycle already holds a memory the ego cannot erase. You can cover it with years of old behavior, but that memory exists, and every time you act from who you already are, you recognize it. And every time you act from who you were, the body tells you. With that tension, that fatigue, that nameless discomfort that arrives too soon. It was not coincidence that you arrived at this content today. The synchronicity Jung studied as the language of the self with the outer world does not operate in linear time. It operates in the time of the process. If these words found you at this exact moment, when the crossing already happened but had not yet been named, that is the most precise confirmation that the self is already operating in its new configuration. Already. For some time now? Now comes the question that matters. Not what changed in you. You already know that, even if you haven't yet said it aloud. The question that matters is this. From which version of yourself are you going to make the next important decision in your life? There are two possibilities. The first, you return to the old self. Its familiar strategies, known fears, worn map of a territory you no longer inhabit. That option offers the comfort of recognition, and there is genuine relief, however brief, in returning to what is known. But there is a price, living with the permanent discomfort of someone in the wrong place, someone who knows at a level they cannot silence that what they are doing no longer corresponds to who they are. Paid in health, in relationships, in the energy consumed maintaining a performance no longer credible, not even to yourself. The second possibility is the one yourself has been preparing for weeks. Stop asking permission from the old self. The next time you stand before a decision, before asking what the version of you that everyone knows would do, ask what the version of you who already crossed the threshold would do. That question is not a mental exercise. It is an act of governance. It is the moment the new self stops being a concept and starts being the axis from which you operate. And the first time you do it consciously, something settles. Like a piece that has been misplaced for months, finally clicking into position. The sound it makes is not thunderous. It is precise. And that precision is the signal that what just happened is real. What the new self needs is not more effort. It needs you to stop sabotaging it with the loyalty you still carry toward the old version. That loyalty is not virtue. It is inertia. And the difference between the two is that virtue brings you closer to who you are. Inertia keeps you where you no longer exist. There is something placed in you before you were born, a direction, a specific function, that no external circumstance can cancel. It can be delayed, obscured, but not cancelled, because its origin is deeper than any decision you made. It is the part of you the process of individuation has been uncovering layer by layer, revealing not an improved version of who you were, but a version closer to what you always were at your deepest core. More real, more yours. The old self was necessary. It fulfilled its function. It protected you when you needed protection. It kept you standing when the terrain wasn't safe. It gave you a map that brought you exactly to this threshold, to this moment where you can finally set it down because the territory ahead no longer requires it. You can honor the old self without continuing to live it. You can thank it for what it did without asking it to keep governing. Because there is something the old self could never give you, not because it was insufficient, but because it didn't have access to it. The quiet certainty of operating from who you actually are, without the tension of maintaining an image, without the weight of answering to expectations designed for a version of you that no longer exists. That certainty is what the new self carries, and you already have it. Not after you resolve everything pending, not after the outer world confirms the transformation. Now, with everything unresolved, with all the uncertainty still present, with all the remnants of the old self that still surface under pressure. Now, because the crossing didn't require everything to be settled. It only required the self to complete its first cycle. And it did. You know it. Because if it weren't true, these words would not be landing the way they are landing. Imagine this moment. You are standing at the threshold of a door you have already crossed. The door is behind you. That side no longer exists in the same form. Before you, a wide, open territory, larger than the old self could have imagined. The only compass that works is the one that was always inside you, calibrated by the process of individuation as never before. That compass is you, your new self, the one already here, the one who arrived, the one who has spent weeks making decisions the old self never would have made. You are not becoming. You have already become. The only step remaining is not forward. It is inward, recognizing what already happened without waiting for outside confirmation. Releasing loyalty to the old self with the same gratitude you give something that fulfilled its purpose. Moving from who you already are, without apology, without softening it to fit the frames of those who have not yet crossed their own threshold. You are chosen, not by chance but by what was already placed in you. And it already arrived. Write in the comments, I am no longer waiting for the sign. I am the sign. It already happened in me, not as a wish, as a declaration, as the concrete act of someone beginning to name themselves from their new identity instead of continuing to wait for permission to inhabit it.